There is a training program so brutal, so methodically designed to break human beings down to their absolute core, that out of every 100 soldiers who attempt it, only one will finish. Not 1 in 10, not 1 in 5, 1 in 100. And the ones who do not make it are not weak people, they are not untrained people. Many of them are already elite soldiers, decorated veterans, men who have already survived wars, already earned combat experience, already proven themselves in the field. They still do not make it. They quit. They get injured. They get medically dropped. They get recycled until they simply cannot continue. And the ones who do finish, the 1% who actually cross that final line, they will tell you it was the hardest thing a human being can do while still being technically alive. Today we are going inside that training. We are going to talk about what it actually looks like, what it demands from the human body and the human mind, why it was designed this way, and what it produces at the end. Because the reason this training is so savage, so deliberately punishing, so statistically impossible to complete, is not cruelty. It is necessity. The people this training is designed to produce are sent into situations where everything has already gone wrong and the mission still has to succeed. They operate alone, in the dark, behind enemy lines, in environments where there is no backup coming, where the plan collapsed 3 hours ago, and where the only thing standing between mission success and catastrophe is the single human being in the field. That human being has to be built differently. And the only way to build that person is to put them through something that cannot be faked, cannot be coached, cannot be survived through talent or genetics or sheer athleticism alone. It has to be survived through something deeper than any of that. Something that lives in a place most people never reach. If you respect the men who go through this, if you have ever wanted to understand what separates the 1% from everyone else, stay with us through this entire video, because by the end of it, you will never look at these soldiers the same way again. And if you are new here, take a second right now and subscribe. Over 98% of viewers watch without ever hitting that button, and it costs you nothing, but it means everything for stories like this one to keep being told. Let's start at the beginning. Let's start with why this training exists at all, because that context is what makes everything else make sense. Armies have always understood that there is a difference between a soldier who fights in formation with his unit around him and a soldier who operates alone, in isolation, with limited communications, limited supplies, and unlimited uncertainty. Regular military training prepares a person for the first kind of environment. You learn to follow orders within a chain of command. You learn your role in a coordinated operation. You learn to function as part of a team where each person covers a specific task and the whole unit moves together. That is foundational. That is necessary. But there is a category of mission that regular training simply cannot prepare a person for. Missions where communications go dark and you cannot reach anyone above you. Missions where the extraction plan fails and you are on your own for days or weeks. Missions where you are operating deep inside enemy territory, in civilian clothes, without air support, without quick reaction forces, without anyone who even knows exactly where you are. Missions where you are captured, interrogated, physically abused, and psychologically dismantled, and you still cannot break. For these missions, you need a different kind of soldier, and creating that soldier requires a different kind of training. The training we are talking about today does not just add skills on top of an already existing soldier. It fundamentally reconstructs the person from the inside out. It strips away everything that is non-essential, every comfort, every habit, every mental defense mechanism, every assumption about what the body can and cannot do, and it forces the person to rebuild from a foundation that is deeper and stronger than anything they came in with. That is why only 1 in 100 makes it, not because the physical demands alone are impossible. There are people who could survive the physical demands, but the combination of physical, mental, psychological, and emotional demands hitting simultaneously and relentlessly, with no sleep, no food, no warmth, no encouragement, no timeline, no clear endpoint visible from where you are standing. That combination breaks virtually everyone. The training begins long before the first evolution. It begins with the selection process, because even getting to the starting line of this training is an accomplishment that the vast majority of people who try will never reach. Candidates who apply for this training are not randomly selected from the general military population. They are already screened out of the larger pool by service records, physical fitness assessments, psychological evaluations, medical screenings, and background reviews. The people who make it to the starting line are already among the best performers in their branch. They have already demonstrated physical excellence, professional competence, and a degree of mental toughness that puts them ahead of their peers. And then they begin the training and discover that everything they thought they knew about their own limits was wrong. The opening phase of the training is deliberate in its design. The first thing the training does is establish sleep deprivation as a constant, not occasional, not temporary, constant. The human brain and body undergo a measurable and well-documented deterioration when deprived of sleep. Motor skills decline, decision-making degrades, emotional regulation collapses, reaction time slows, pain tolerance drops, the ability to focus on complex tasks under pressure diminishes significantly. The training exploits all of this on purpose, because in the real world, an operator running a covert mission behind enemy lines does not get to stop and sleep when things get complicated. He has to make critical decisions when his brain is functioning at 40% capacity. He has to maintain composure during an interrogation when his nervous system is running on nothing but adrenaline and cortisol. He has to navigate a terrain he has never seen before in pitch darkness while carrying a load that would challenge a fresh, well-rested athlete in broad daylight. The sleep deprivation in training creates a controlled version of that reality, and it begins to separate the candidates almost immediately. Some people discover that when they are genuinely exhausted, the voice in their head that says quit is the loudest thing they have ever heard. Others discover that the voice exists, but it can be identified, labeled, and refused. That difference is not physical, it is not genetic. It is not a product of athletic training, it is something else entirely, and the training is specifically designed to find it. Within the first days of training, candidates are doing things that sound almost absurd when described in isolation, running long distances in sand with boats on their heads, getting wet in cold water and then standing in the wind, doing repetitive physical exercises until multiple people vomit, moving as a team through an obstacle that is deliberately designed to frustrate and disorient rather than simply exhaust. And the cadre, the instructors who run this program, are not encouraging. They are not coaches in any conventional sense of that word. Their job is not to help the candidates succeed. Their job is to be a living representation of the environment these candidates will face in the field. Uncompromising, unpredictable, constantly applying pressure, finding weakness and pressing on it, looking for the moment when a candidate breaks and documenting what it looks like when that happens. Because if that moment comes in training, that is information. That is something that can be addressed, rebuilt, learned from. If that moment comes in the field with a real mission and real lives depending on the outcome, it is a catastrophe. The physical demands of the training are not simply about cardiovascular fitness or strength. Anyone who has trained seriously for athletic competition understands that fitness is domain-specific. A marathon runner is not automatically prepared for heavy load carries. A powerlifter is not automatically prepared for sustained multi-day ruck marches. A swimmer is not automatically prepared for cold water immersion at night, with no wetsuit and a set of tasks to complete before being allowed to come out. This training hits all of those domains simultaneously. It is built to find the weak link in any physical preparation, because every candidate has one. Every human body has a specific failure point. One person breaks down in their knees, another breaks down in their shoulders. Another develops hypothermia faster than the average person. Another struggles with the specific combination of altitude and exertion. The training finds those failure points through sheer comprehensive punishment, and then it keeps applying pressure to see what the candidate does with that failure point. Quitting is always available. At almost every point in the training, quitting is explicitly an option. There is a bell. In several versions of this kind of training, there is a literal physical bell that a candidate can ring to signal that they are done. All they have to do is walk over to the bell and ring it. No one will hurt them, no one will shame them. They will be given warm clothes, warm food, and a chance to reflect on the decision they just made. The existence of that bell is not an accident. It is one of the most psychologically sophisticated elements of the entire program, because it means that every single person who continues the training is continuing by active choice. There is no lock on the door. There is no fence. There is no physical restraint preventing any individual from leaving. Every person who keeps going is choosing, deliberately, consciously, in full awareness of how much pain and exhaustion and misery is still ahead of them, to stay. That choice, made over and over and over again, across days without sleep and physical systems that are breaking down, is what the training is actually selecting for. Not strength, not speed, not even raw toughness in the popular sense of that word. It is selecting for the ability to make the right decision in the worst possible moment. To look at the thing that your entire nervous system is screaming at you to avoid and say, not yet, not today, not this time. The cold water is one of the most psychologically brutal elements of any training program of this kind. Cold water immersion has a documented effect on the human mind that goes beyond discomfort. When the body's core temperature begins to drop, the brain interprets this as an existential threat. It is not irrational. Hypothermia kills. The body knows this on a level that is older than conscious thought. The survival instinct that fires when a person is submerged in cold water is among the most primal and powerful forces in human neurobiology. And the training puts candidates into that water and asks them to stay there, to stay calm, to continue functioning, to think clearly, to follow instructions, to work as a team, while every single alarm in their nervous system is at maximum volume, telling them to get out, to get warm, to stop. The candidates who make it through the cold water are not the ones who do not feel it. They all feel it. They all have the same neurological response. The ones who make it are the ones who have learned to acknowledge the feeling, to feel the full force of it without being owned by it. They feel the cold, they feel the fear, they feel the alarm bells going off in their brainstem, and they do the next thing anyway. That capacity is not something that exists in full form when a person arrives at training. It is built. It is built in the water, in the sand, in the sleep deprivation, in the moments when everything in a person is saying stop, and they find something underneath all of that noise, and they use it to take one more step. The team elements of the training are as critical as the individual elements. Many people come into this program with a mental model of special operations selection as an individual ordeal, the lone warrior proving himself against the elements. And while individual mental and physical performance absolutely matters, the training is deeply and intentionally team-based. Boats are carried by teams. Log carries require the team to move together. Specific evolutions cannot be completed by any one person, no matter how physically gifted. They require 6 or 8 or 10 people to coordinate their movements, communicate under extreme stress, support each other's weaknesses, and function as a coherent unit when every individual in that unit is running at the edge of their capacity. This creates a fascinating dynamic, because when a team is doing a boat carry and one person begins to fail, the team feels it immediately. The weight distribution shifts. Someone else picks up the slack. And in that moment of picking up the slack, the person who does it has to make a calculation that goes beyond personal survival. They are already at their limit. They are already barely hanging on. And now they are carrying more. Not for themselves, for the person beside them, who needed something, and the only person available to provide it was them. That is a profoundly different kind of demand than anything physical. It is asking a person to reach past the point where they have run out of themselves and find something that lives in the space between them and the person they are carrying for. The teams that succeed are not always the teams with the most physically gifted members. They are the teams that develop a specific kind of coherence under sustained pressure. A wordless communication, an ability to read each other's states and compensate before compensation is asked for. A shared commitment to the team's survival that becomes more powerful than any individual's desire to stop. The teams that fall apart are not always the ones with the weakest members. Sometimes they are the teams that have a highly gifted individual who cannot subordinate their own performance to the team's collective need. Someone who is spectacularly capable as an individual athlete, but who, when the team is struggling, goes into a mode of personal survival rather than collective support. That person will often fail to complete the training regardless of their individual physical capacity. Because the training is not building individual warriors, it is building people who can function in small teams under conditions designed to destroy small teams. Hell Week is the phrase most commonly associated with the most famous version of this kind of training. It is a period of sustained operations, typically 5 to 6 days, in which candidates receive approximately 4 hours of total sleep across the entire period. Not 4 hours a night, 4 hours across the entire week. Every evolution during that period is designed to push the candidates beyond the limits of what they have so far experienced in the training. The combination of sleep deprivation, continuous physical demand, cold water immersion, nutritional stress, and constant cadre pressure during this period produces a physiological and psychological state that is genuinely unlike anything a person can prepare for through conventional training. The brain during extreme sleep deprivation begins to generate what are called microsleeps, brief moments, sometimes only a few seconds long, where the brain simply shuts down regardless of what the person is doing. Candidates during Hell Week have been known to fall asleep while standing, while running, while sitting up eating. They have auditory and visual hallucinations. The world stops making full sense. The only things that remain clear and reliable are the most fundamental things: the person next to you, the evolution you are currently in, the fact that you have not rung the bell. The most remarkable thing about Hell Week is not that so many people do not make it through, it is that anyone does. The human body is not designed to function in the conditions that Hell Week creates. The survival instinct should, by all rational measures, override every other consideration in the brain during this period. But a small number of people are able to reach past the survival instinct and hold on to something else, something that was placed there, or found there, or built there through a combination of preparation and character that the training cannot fully manufacture but can absolutely reveal. There is a concept in this world called the 40% rule. The idea is that when a person feels like they have absolutely nothing left, when the body is screaming stop and the mind is agreeing, they are actually at approximately 40% of their true capacity. The remaining 60% is locked behind a mental governor that the ordinary person never accesses because the signal from the body is so overwhelming that it feels like a hard limit. In the most extreme moments of this training, the candidates who continue are operating in that space. They are in the zone beyond 40%. They are past the point where their mind has any rational justification for continuing, past the point where the math adds up, past the point where the feeling of the next step is anything other than agony, and they take the step anyway because the decision to take it was made before the training began, and no amount of suffering has yet been sufficient to unmake that decision. The instructors in this training are a specific kind of human being. They are almost universally graduates of the same pipeline or equivalent pipelines. They have sat in the cold water. They have carried the boats. They have walked through Hell Week on the far side of reason. They know what the candidates are experiencing because they have experienced it. And that knowledge makes them uniquely capable of identifying the moment when a candidate is truly at their limit versus the moment when a candidate is at the limit their mind has set for them, which is a completely different thing. An instructor who sees a candidate approaching genuine medical danger will intervene. This training is controlled. Medical personnel are always present. The line between pushed to the absolute limit and placed in genuine mortal danger is maintained with precision and professionalism. But the line between uncomfortable and at genuine medical risk is enormous, and the training lives in that enormous space without apology. The cadre also watch for something more specific and more important than just physical performance. They watch for how a candidate responds to failure. Because in this environment, failure happens constantly. The evolution that was going well suddenly goes wrong. The team that was working together hits a wall. The individual who was performing well trips, drops something, makes an error under pressure. What happens in the next 10 seconds is often more instructive than an entire previous day of performance. The candidate who responds to failure by internal blame, self-recrimination, a collapse in confidence, or a spike in panic, is displaying something that will be catastrophic in the field. The candidate who responds to failure by rapid reassessment, adaptation, communication to the team, and an immediate return to forward movement is displaying something invaluable. The training does not just create pressure, it creates failure under pressure and watches what grows in the aftermath. Navigation and land navigation specifically is another dimension of the training that reveals character in ways that pure physical performance does not. In land navigation evolutions, candidates are given a map, a compass, coordinates, and a set of checkpoints to find across an unfamiliar terrain in a set amount of time. They do this alone or in small teams, often at night, often under a load, often following a period of physical exhaustion that has degraded their fine motor skills and their ability to do the simple math that accurate navigation requires. Getting lost in this training is not just a physical inconvenience. It is a window into how a person responds to being wrong in an environment where being wrong has consequences. Some candidates, when they realize they have made a navigation error, stop functioning, they freeze, they second-guess everything. They spiral into a kind of cognitive paralysis that compounds the error rather than correcting it. Other candidates, when they realize they have made a navigation error, stop, reassess, identify the most likely location of the mistake, correct their bearing, and move forward without the emotional weight of the error slowing them down. That difference in response is the same difference that will matter on a real mission when the plan changes and the person in the field has to operate on updated information without the luxury of anxiety. The weapons training phase of the program is where a different set of demands emerge. Marksmanship under pressure is a skill that separates from marksmanship in a controlled range environment in ways that are stark and immediate. On a range, with full sleep, with no physical fatigue, with no emotional load, most trained soldiers can shoot well. They have the fundamental mechanics. They understand the principles of sight alignment and trigger control. The round goes where they intend it to go. Now take that same soldier, run them for several hours with a load, put them in a cold environment, deprive them of sleep for 2 days, give them a target that moves, give them a time constraint, put them in a scenario where the correct target is surrounded by civilians or friendly forces, and the hit rate drops dramatically for almost everyone. The training creates exactly this environment, not because it wants people to fail the marksmanship qualification, but because it wants to build people who can execute precise, disciplined, morally accountable lethal action in conditions that are nothing like a controlled range. The operator who fires a wrong round because they were too exhausted or too rushed or too panicked has not just failed a marksmanship test, they have potentially altered the entire strategic environment of a mission in ways that cascade outward, far beyond the immediate tactical situation. The training understands this. The standards for weapons performance reflect this, and the candidates who cannot maintain those standards under the conditions the training creates do not progress, regardless of how well they have done in every other phase. Because in the field, a failure of precision in a weapons handling context is not recoverable in the same way that a failure in a boat carry or a land navigation exercise is recoverable. This training also includes extended isolation phases, periods where the candidate is operating alone, with minimal communications, given a set of objectives, and left to execute them without supervision, without encouragement, without any external feedback about whether they are doing well or poorly. This phase reveals yet another dimension that the physical evolutions cannot fully expose. How does this person function when no one is watching? The most physically impressive candidate in any cohort can still break down during isolation if their motivation for continuing is externally sourced. If what has been driving them through the hard physical evolutions is the presence of the team, the energy of the group, the social pressure of not being the one who quits in front of others, then isolation removes all of those supports and leaves them with only themselves. And for some people, only themselves is not enough. Not because they are weak people, but because they have never before been confronted with their own company in conditions of sustained misery, without any of the normal social scaffolding that makes human endurance possible. The candidates who thrive in isolation are the ones who have an internal relationship with their own purpose that does not require external validation to remain functional. They know why they are here. That knowledge is not contingent on anyone else being present to confirm it. It does not require an audience. It does not require encouragement. It is just there, quiet and solid, like a foundation underneath everything else. Those are the people this training is looking for. Not loud people. Not the people who are most visibly intense or aggressive or demonstrably motivated during the group evolutions. The quiet ones, who are still moving in the right direction when there is nobody watching. The medical screening elements of the training deserve specific attention because they add a layer of statistical elimination that is entirely outside any candidate's control and that adds to the brutal honesty of the overall completion rate. Training injuries are not only common, they are an expected part of the process. The human body subjected to sustained high-volume physical stress in difficult environmental conditions will break down. Stress fractures develop. Tendons become inflamed. Rhabdomyolysis, the breakdown of muscle tissue that can become life-threatening if not treated, occurs in a significant percentage of candidates. Hypothermia is a real and constant medical concern during cold water phases. These are not training failures. They are physiological realities, and they eliminate otherwise qualified, otherwise mentally prepared candidates through no fault of will or character. A candidate who has made every right mental decision, who has refused every temptation to quit, who is performing in the top tier of their class across every measured dimension, can be medically dropped from the training because their femur developed a stress fracture that makes continuing a safety risk rather than a growth opportunity. Those candidates often get the opportunity to return after recovery, but the recycling process, starting over from a set point in the training after an injury, adds its own dimension of psychological demand. The candidate who was measuring their progress against a specific timeline must now reset that timeline. Must watch a new cohort of people begin the phases they have already survived. Must do it again, and the second time through, the body remembers what the first time cost. The recycled candidates who make it through are some of the most remarkable examples of what this training produces. They are people who were forced to a point of involuntary stopping, had to sit with that, had to rebuild, and came back and did it again. There is a specific kind of mental architecture required to do that, and it is not common. The survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training that is embedded in the advanced phases of this program may be the single most psychologically demanding element of the entire pipeline. SERI training, as it is known, puts candidates into a simulated prisoner of war environment. They are captured. They are subjected to interrogation. They are placed in stress positions. They are sleep-deprived in a new way, a way designed to create disorientation and psychological vulnerability. They are subjected to sensory manipulation and a sustained campaign designed to get them to reveal information they have been instructed to protect. And the people running this phase are extraordinarily skilled at finding the pressure points that break people, because they have studied, in depth and in detail, every documented technique that enemy forces have used to extract information from captured personnel. They are not guessing. They are not improvising. They are executing a comprehensive psychological methodology against people who are already at the far edge of their physical and mental reserves. The goal of SERI is not to traumatize. It is to inoculate. The first time a person is placed in a stress position during an interrogation should not be in a real enemy compound with real consequences. It should be here, in a controlled environment, with qualified psychological support available and a clear endpoint that the candidate knows exists, even when the moment they are in feels like it has no end. The candidates who come out of SERI training have experienced something that changes their relationship with fear in a way that is difficult to describe to anyone who has not been through it. They have sat inside their own fear. They have felt its full weight. They have felt it pressing against their capacity to function. And they have discovered that it has a limit, that on the far side of the fear, even when the fear has not been removed, there is still a version of themselves that is capable of making decisions, maintaining commitments, and protecting what they were entrusted to protect. That discovery does not make them fearless. It makes them free. There is a critical difference. The fearless person has a blind spot. They underestimate danger. They move through situations without appropriate caution because they cannot feel what the situation is asking them to feel. The free person feels everything the situation demands that they feel, and then acts on their values rather than their feelings. That is a person you can send into the worst situations on earth and trust that they will make the right call. The small arms medicine training, the combat casualty care, the ability to keep a teammate alive until professional medical evacuation arrives, is a dimension of the training that brings with it its own psychological weight. Because treating a casualty in the field is not an abstract exercise, it is an intensely visceral, emotionally demanding task that requires a person to suppress or compartmentalize their emotional response to what they are seeing and doing in order to execute the technical procedures that the moment requires. The training uses realistic simulations, high-fidelity mannequins, simulated wounds, actors portraying casualties with realistic makeup and prosthetics. The environment is designed to trigger the emotional responses that would fire in a real casualty situation. And then it asks the candidate to move through those responses and do the job anyway. Tourniquet placement under stress. Airway management when the environment is loud and disorienting. Needle decompression of a tension pneumothorax on a teammate who is telling you they cannot breathe. These are not skills that can be learned in a calm classroom and then expected to transfer perfectly to a chaotic field environment. They have to be trained under stress, with the emotional load present, until the procedural memory is strong enough to run independently of the emotional state the person is in. The candidates who complete this training come out with hands that know what to do, even when the rest of them is experiencing something that would paralyze a person who had not been prepared this way. The language training component is a dimension that many people outside the special operations world do not fully appreciate. The operators produced by this training are frequently required to operate in foreign countries, among foreign populations, in service of objectives that require cultural fluency, as well as linguistic competence. A soldier who can only communicate through a translator is operating with a fundamental vulnerability. They are dependent on a third party to understand what the people around them are saying, to communicate urgency, or subtlety, or specific technical requirements. The training recognizes this and includes language instruction as a core element of preparation, rather than an optional add-on. The pace and depth of this language instruction is another venue where the 1% of completers separate from the rest, because learning a language is something that most adults find genuinely difficult. The neural plasticity required to build a new linguistic architecture in the brain decreases with age, and the speed at which the training expects language acquisition is not matched by the pace most adult learners are accustomed to from any civilian context. The candidates who succeed in the language component are often not the ones who have prior foreign language experience, though that helps. They are the ones who approach the difficulty of language learning with the same mental orientation they bring to every other hard thing in the training. Not waiting to feel ready, not looking for the natural flow to come, grinding through the discomfort of being a beginner in a new domain, while simultaneously maintaining performance in every other domain the training is demanding. That capacity to handle multiple simultaneous demands across completely different skill categories is itself a defining characteristic of the people this training is designed to build. The attrition across the different phases of the training is not uniform. Different phases remove different people. The early physical phases remove people who arrived without sufficient physical preparation. The sleep deprivation phases remove people who cannot maintain decision quality and team cohesion when their cognitive resources are depleted. The isolation phases remove people whose motivation is externally sourced. The Sira phase removes people who discover that their tolerance for psychological pressure under physical distress is lower than they believed it to be. The weapons phases remove people who cannot maintain precision and discipline under conditions of extreme fatigue and environmental stress. And some small number of people fall at the very end, close enough to the finish line to see it, for reasons that are sometimes obvious and sometimes not, that remind everyone involved that nothing about this is certain until it is finished. The graduation ceremony for this training, when it happens, is not typically a large or elaborate affair. There is no parade. There is no stadium full of family members watching on a big screen. There is a specific moment when the thing that has been sought is given, when the designation that means the training is complete is conferred, and the people in the room who have been through this same thing understand without any additional words what has just happened and what it cost. The people who earn this designation do not typically talk about it extensively in public. This is not false modesty. It is a reflection of the culture that the training builds. A culture in which the internal experience of the thing matters more than the external recognition of it, in which the relationship with what you have been through is primarily between you and the experience itself, not between you and anyone else's awareness of it. That culture is also operationally necessary. Because the people this training produces operate in environments where the most valuable thing about them is that no one knows they are there. The invisibility is the capability, the quiet is the power, and the restraint that keeps them from telling their story to the world is the same restraint that keeps them safe and effective in the field. There are men and women who have completed this training who live ordinary-looking civilian lives in ordinary communities, where their neighbors have no idea what they have done or what they are capable of doing. They drop their kids at school. They go to the grocery store. They sit in traffic. And inside that ordinary exterior lives an architecture of capability and experience that was built through one of the most rigorous human development processes ever designed. That is not irony. That is the point. The most dangerous thing does not announce itself. It does not need to. The thing that does not announce itself does not give itself away. The thing that does not give itself away is the thing that can still operate in the environment it was built to operate in when the time comes, without warning, with full effect. The dropout rates across the history of this type of training have varied with different cohorts, different weather conditions, different iterations of the program itself. But the 1 in 100 figure, or figures close to it, have remained consistent enough across enough decades and enough programs of this category that it is not an outlier statistic. It is a reflection of something real about the relationship between the demands of the training and the human population that attempts it. The training is not trying to fail people. That is a misunderstanding of its purpose that matters to correct. The training is not constructed as a gatekeeping exercise whose primary goal is exclusion. Its primary goal is production. It is trying to build something. It is trying to produce a specific kind of human being. And the demands of the training are calibrated to the demands of the role, not to the demands of what is comfortable or survivable for the largest number of people. If the training were easier, it would produce something different. It would produce people who are good under moderate stress, with some sleep deprivation, and some cold water, and some physical demand. Those people are valuable. The military needs those people, but they are not the people who get sent into the situations where this training is specifically designed to prepare people to succeed. The training is hard because the job is hard. The job is hard because the situations it responds to are hard. The situations are hard because the world contains a category of problem that does not yield to moderate solutions, and the world will always contain that category of problem, which means the training will always be this hard, which means the 1 in 100 figure will remain. because that figure is not a measure of the training's difficulty level relative to an arbitrary standard. It is a measure of how rare the combination of qualities required to complete it actually is in the human population, which makes the people who complete it genuinely rare, not in the marketing sense of that word. In the literal sense, the sense that means you could walk through 100 soldiers and only one of them has this in them, in the combination and the depth that this requires. That is a remarkable thing to sit with. 1 in 100. Think about that number in terms of the world around you. Think about a stadium. Think about a city. Think about what that ratio means when you apply it to every domain of human experience, to the people who are willing to take the hardest path when the easier one is right there, to the people who ring the bell in their own lives over and over, versus the one who keeps walking toward the thing that is asking everything of them. The quality that lets a person complete this training is not absent from civilian life. It shows up in the surgeon who keeps going when a procedure goes wrong instead of calling for someone else to finish it. It shows up in the entrepreneur who has failed twice and is building a third time on the same ruins. It shows up in the parent sitting beside a hospital bed at 3 in the morning who is not going anywhere. It shows up in the teacher in an underfunded classroom who has every reason to stop caring, and has not stopped caring and will not. The circumstances are different, the stakes are different, the specific expression is completely different, but the root of it is the same, the decision made in the worst moment to continue. Made not because it feels good, not because the math works out, not because a clear end is visible from where you are standing, but because somewhere underneath all the noise of the exhaustion and the fear and the doubt, there is something quiet that knows what you said you were going to do and has not forgotten it and will not let you forget it either. That quality, wherever it lives in a person, whatever its origin, however it was built or found or stumbled upon, that is what this training is looking for. And when it finds it, when it identifies the 1 in 100 who has it in the specific form and depth that the training requires, it takes that person and it builds around that quality a complete and comprehensive suite of capabilities that makes them one of the most effective individual contributors to human security that has ever existed. The cost of that is everything, literally everything. Physically, psychologically, the training takes everything, and the graduation means that you gave everything and there was still something left. That leftover something is what gets the job done in the places where nothing else can. These are the soldiers who go where others cannot follow, who do what others are not built to do, who carry a weight that most people will never feel, and who carry it without complaint, and without recognition, and without the need for either. If you learned something today, if this story meant something to you, hit the like button right now and subscribe so you never miss another story like this one. The men and women we talked about today have earned every word of that story. The least we can do is remember it.